Welcome to Tales from the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Mick West. Today's guest is Jim Lee. Jim Lee is someone I've known of and talked to a few times online for several years. Jim is, or at least he used to be, a very deep conspiracy theorist in that he believed in things like chemtrails and a bunch of other conspiracy theories. Now he's less so. However, he still subscribes to a version of the chemtrails conspiracy theory, which is that there's some kind of secret geoengineering plot going on, maybe not involving all the planes that we see overhead leaving trails, but he thinks there's something going on. He really doesn't believe the classical chemtrail conspiracy theory, though, and he kind of steers away from that. And he actually does a bit of debunking of things like that on his website. And he does have a strong following, though, and his followers generally tend to be the people who believe in the classical chemtrails conspiracy theory. So I kind of feel like perhaps what he's doing might not be always working. This is something that we talk about in the podcast. So here he is, Jim Lee. All right, Jim Lee, welcome to Tales from the Rabbit Hole. Thank you for being here.
I appreciate it, Mick. It's been a long time. We've talked a couple times on the phone. I've heckled you quite a bit on your forum, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. I've actually known you, online for quite a long time because you've been kind of active in the chemtrails sphere online. Is that kind of an accurate description of how you kind of, how you got started in this type of thing?
I would agree with that. I would say probably back in 2008 was about the time that I, became interested in geoengineering and the topic. And around 2010 through 2014, I became a member of Ken Caldeira's geoengineering group and did a little bit of debating in there with Ken Caldeira and Stephen Salter and John Latham, the guys from the Silver Lining Project, Marine Cloud Brightening Project. And it's kind of funny how it evolved from me having a serious discussion about the difference between weather modification and geoengineering to more of a focus on the entire chemtrail debate, because I see this major overlap where there's more of a focus on chemtrails and less of a focus on actual weather modification and geoengineering. So that's how I initially got into the debate about chemtrails, and at first I was inclined to believe everything. I had a blog, resonated.com. I was anonymous. And, you rightly so pointed out a lot of the holes in my theories. And, basically my opinion on the entire chemtrail debate has evolved quite a bit over time. And what I really see now as the problem is that, it comes down to a lot of semantics. That chemtrails being a high level descriptor, to a lot of people, contrails are a high level descriptor. Meaning that they have different meanings for different people. You can't. It's not an apple or an orange. You know what I mean? If you say chemtrail, it could mean many different things to many different people.
Well, let's just back up real quick, just to make sure everyone understands what you're talking about there, because not everybody is going to be entirely familiar with even the terms chemtrails and contrails. So chemtrails are basically just the theory that the clouds that are left behind plane, the white trails left behind planes, are some kind of deliberate spraying. And there's this whole conspiracy theory built up around this that suggests all kinds of different reasons why people, the government might be spraying. And one of those theories is what you mentioned, which is geoengineering, which is the idea that we can actually do things like spraying things into the atmosphere to modify the climate. And so there's become this major variant of the chemtrail theory is that there's a secret project going on to modify the climate via this covert geoengineering, which they're performing secretly. and that's something that you've obviously talked about in the past. So I just want to make sure, like, when we discuss things, we explain what we're talking about, because you and I know all these things, but not everybody is familiar with every little nuance. Anyway, so you were saying.
So yeah, like I said, my views on the topic have evolved obviously over time. But what I see as the biggest problem is that, while a lot of people attribute, I don't follow the whole it's depopulation. Mm-hmm. I don't follow the whole, I do believe that it is geoengineering, and I believe that because scientists have said so. The difference being that, Chuck Long from NOAA's CRES Earth System Research Lab, when he called aircraft contrails accidental geoengineering, he was referring to planes whitening the sky. And what he was actually referring to wasn't even the clouds, which is kind of ironic. Most of the prominent chemtrail websites specifically called the clouds that are coming out of planes geoengineering, whereas Chuck Long said, ice haze is brightening the sky. So he referred to this as accidental geoengineering, and I seem to recall in the same aforementioned geoengineering group with Ken Caldera, you and Ken Caldera debating what geoengineering would look like to average people. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, I do remember. Yeah, because what we're talking about here is with the whitening, is that if you have more particulates in the air, you get more of the haze. And this is the haze you can see very easily. If you look straight up, the sky looks a deep blue, and if you look towards the horizon, it looks white because you're looking through more particulates. And the idea is that if there was some kind of geoengineering that was spraying stuff, then it would look more whiter. When you look straight up, it would look more like what you'd look like the horizon. And yeah, they did. They've done various studies, I think, like computer models on what it would look like, and there would be a detectable difference, I think, but not one that's particularly noticeable given all the variations that we see in the sky from day to day. A lot of people now, they point at the actual sky now and they say that it looks whiter than it did before, which may well be possible because there's a lot more aviation and pollution than there was before.
And that's exactly what I say, and it's no secret that what I try to do is take people who believe in the conspiracy theory, like I did, that it was every single plane in the sky is part of some nefarious geoengineering program. And I don't believe that's possible. I've focused on jet fuel, what's in the jet fuel, the soot and metals that are coming out, how they form clouds, what those clouds, how they affect climate, how they affect health. I've really shifted my focus to that, but I still hold out the contention that there is a possibility that secret geoengineering could occur. And I base this on two main premises. Mm-hmm. One, that there have been two prominent geoengineering studies about, that direct application via airlines. One by David Keith, with the Aurora Aerospace Sciences, and then one more recently. And in both of those papers, they said they only needed anywhere from 4 to at max 100 planes to geoengineer the planet. So if that's true, then when we have 150,000 flights per day, when we have at any given time over America 5,000 flights, it doesn't mean that every single flight would have to be part of some nefarious scheme to geoengineer the planet. And then the second point I would make is that history tends to repeat itself. And what we've seen in the past is that the CIA, Henry Kissinger, the Air Force at Wright-Patterson, and the U.S. Navy at China Lake were involved in Operation Popeye, Operation Motor Pool, where they did weather warfare over Vietnam. Simultaneously, the CIA was involved in Project Nile Blue, where they were doing cloud seeding over the Gulf of Mexico to deny rainfall to Cuba to kill Castro's sugar crops. So then, of course, following that, there was a weather warfare ban of 1978, NMOD. And, since then, there really hasn't been a lot of discussion in the public sphere at all about weather modification, let alone the fact that weather warfare is possible. There is no way to verify. This was just as recent as the last weather modification conference. I went to the one in 2018 and interviewed Raytheon U.S. Naval Research Lab, Dr. Daniel Rosenfeld, Dr. William Cotton, who was part of Project Storm Fury. I interviewed a lot of these climate scientists, James Roger Fleming, my hero. And basically what I got from that is that while all these technologies are, in use, while the CIA has a history of weather warfare, the CIA also funded the National Academy of Sciences reports on climate intervention, the one on CDR, carbon capture, and stratospheric aerosol injection. That was funded by the CIA. Dr. Alan Robach, a geoengineer, said, I got a call from the CIA asking if another country was controlling the weather over our country, would we know it? And he also stated, at the same time, I was wondering, were they asking me if we were controlling the weather over another country, would they know it? Well, Diane Seidel at the Weather Modification Conference said very clearly, we cannot detect rogue geoengineering. And for me, that's a problem. So on the one hand,
let me just stop you real there, because I think this is an issue that's come up before, is that you're very fluidly shifted between two concepts there: the idea of geoengineering, which is climate modification, and the idea of weather modification. And I think a lot of people are familiar with weather modification in terms of cloud seeding. A lot of things you mentioned there were just cloud seeding, where things are sprayed into clouds to increase precipitation, which is a very different thing from the stratospheric climate engineering that we're talking about, which is about spraying things from planes at very high altitudes. So I see you kind of jumping back and forth there a lot between mentioning geoengineering and mentioning weather modification. Now, I know some people would consider weather modification to be geoengineering, but really it's a very, very localized thing that's done on clouds, like they do it here where we are in the mountains in the Sierras to increase the snowpack. But it's not climate engineering. It's not geoengineering.
I agree with you, but here's the rub, and this is one of the, if you go to Ken Caldera's forum, to this day, the second most viewed post on his entire forum is where I laid out the argument that we're talking about right now. Whereas weather modification is not geoengineering, geoengineering is weather modification. And this is confirmed by Dr. Ben Kravitz, by the several different geoengineering, GeoMIP, many of the different, the International Geoengineering, IGEA. Basically, what they say is that if we were to do geoengineering, that mimicking volcanoes will have the same effect that natural volcanoes have. It will modify weather on a global scale, that it will change rainfall patterns worldwide. So
but no one's ever denied that. I mean, that's an obvious thing. If you change the climate, it changes the weather, because the weather is localized expressions of the climate. But if you change the weather, it doesn't change the climate. So just saying that climate engineering is weather modification is kind of it's kind of a pointless statement, I would argue, in that it's you're making a connection between these things where there really isn't a connection. You're not doing weather modification when you're doing climate engineering. You're doing climate engineering, which, yes, it will have effects because it's raising or lowering the temperature of the Earth. But it's not the same as weather modification, and I really would say you shouldn't be confusing people by equating the two things.
I don't believe that I'm confusing people at all. In fact, Dr. Alan Robach said exactly the same thing. So this isn't just coming from me. Dr. Alan Robach, geoengineer, in his 27 reasons not to geoengineer, said very clearly it will affect global rainfall patterns. So
Yeah, but not in a way that they will actually understand. I mean, that's part of the problem.
That's even worse. And
Yeah.
it's actually it's identical to cloud seeding because according to the National Academy of Sciences report in 2004, I believe it was, or 2003, they said our view is the same as it was 60 years ago. That with cloud seeding, we don't know what the results are. They are completely unprovable. There's no efficacy to the science of cloud seeding. So the same is true of geoengineering and climate engineering.
Well, except that cloud seeding either makes it rain a bit more or it doesn't make it rain a bit more. It doesn't have lots of side effects. The problem with climate engineering is that you're modifying the temperature of the entire planet, which has massive effects over the entire planet. Weather modification, they just don't know if it works. Climate engineering, we don't know if we're destroying the planet. So I think there's quite a big difference there.
Yeah, but and I agree with that. But at the same time, like I said, the Ken Caldera, the difference between global warming or climate change and geoengineering is God killed people or you killed people. And there's another argument on Ken's forum, SRM, how to deal with the losers, and they just clearly lay it out that as a result of geoengineering, people will die. How are we going to pay for the losers? And the reason they're going to die is because the southern hemisphere will likely get drier and the northern hemisphere will get wetter. So, and they said whether, people are going to attribute these massive weather changes to climate engineering, whether real or not, and how are we going to deal with that? Obviously the public relations side of that. And, how are we going to pay for the dead people? So that's what geoengineering governance is all about. And that's why I've been, very fervent about being in this debate about geoengineering and weather modification, because the two, I believe, they coincide, they go hand in hand. And I'll throw this other one at you. The Indian Space Organization just recently said they found black carbon from aircraft emissions. It's the only possible source of it at 18 kilometers in the sky, which is in the stratosphere. Mm-hmm. So what they're basically saying is the Indian Space Organization said that airline traffic, the exhaust coming out of airlines, are affecting their monsoons, destroying the ozone layer, and, causing other problems. And this is directly attributable to the black carbon. So part of it is, because of the Himalayas, the mountains and the updraft, that basically updraft is carrying this material into the stratosphere. Pollution. So aircraft pollution is being raised into the stratosphere. Well, what's in that aircraft pollution? It is carbon black dust. It's soot. The soot is filled with metals and wrapped in sulfur. So is that stratospheric sulfur injection intentional or unintentional? It is. It's sulfur being injected into the stratosphere. Chuck Long says the sky's getting whiter. We're doing accidental geoengineering. MIT just recently had an article. We're about to stop a massive accidental experiment in cooling the planet, and they were referring to ship tracks. Same idea. It's chemtrails, but 50 miles wide and thousands of miles long. Marine stratocumulus. So the idea that this isn't geoengineering is no longer an issue. They call it accidental geoengineering.
Well, they call carbon dioxide emissions accidental geoengineering as well. Anything that humans do that affects the planet can be called accidental geoengineering. You could say the heat island effect of cities, because you've got all this black asphalt absorbing the sun, is essentially a form of geoengineering. But I just want to go back to one thing you mentioned earlier about saying that geoengineering will kill people. And this is something that people have talked about. If we do geoengineering, there will be winners and losers. But the idea of geoengineering is that there would be less losers than if we didn't do it. And that we're trying to, the idea is to avert some kind of catastrophic change in the environment that would require a massive readjustment of society, which would but it would result in more deaths. If suddenly all the crops failed by a natural means, then so it's not like we're trying to decide whether or not to kill all these people. it's kind of like you're probably familiar with the trolley problem, which is a philosophy problem, which
Yeah.
is there's a runaway trolley and
Yeah.
there's five people on the line ahead of you, but you could go it off to another branch of the line. You could redirect it where there's only like two people. Like, do you pull the
But those
lever?
that's your mom. But that's your mom and dad. So make a choice.
Yeah, or even if it's not though,
I,
even if it's
yeah.
strangers, people have a lot of difficulty with making a decision to kill people. The people would rather let nature, in this case a runaway trolley, take its course. And there's people done experiments with this. It's kind of a fun, not fun, but it's a very interesting thing to study what people's reactions are to this. So I can see, with the geoengineering thing, David Keith says, yes, tens of thousands of people will die because of this. But, he also doesn't really mention that the idea is that hundreds of thousands or even millions of people will not die because of it. But you have to pull the trigger, and you're choosing some people rather than other. So I just want to clear up that it's not that we're going to kill lots of people just for some technological reason. It's to stop other people dying.
Well, let's define what you're talking about. So this is what's called the Clathrate gun hypothesis. You're familiar with that, correct?
Well, you remind me, because I'm sure
Okay,
I am.
so so
we need to
basically
explain to everybody else.
they dug into the ice cores at the poles, and they basically dug down to where they say the dinosaurs are. And they look at it and they say, right here we have dinosaur farts. And that's a lot of CO2, followed by a massive increase in methane. So the theory behind the Clathrate gun hypothesis, or runaway global warming, is that dinosaur farts melted methane clathrates, or frozen methane, which then vented into the atmosphere and caused runaway global warming, which killed the dinosaurs. This is what the modern, science behind the runaway global warming effect is based on, is that right now they say we have methane clathrates that are venting, that the Arctic Methane Emergency Group says that because of CO2, that it's, melting these methane deposits, and that any moment we could have runaway global warming. Therefore, we should geoengineer. Yeah. Therefore, the AOCs of the world and, individuals like that are saying we only have 12 years to live. I mean, it's so outrageous.
That's not really a mainstream view, though. The Arctic Methane Emergency Group, I'm sure you see it whenever it comes up on the geoengineering group on Google Groups. People don't really take them that seriously. People look at things like the methane melting, and but they usually talk about it in terms of for like 100 years. But some people are saying like it's going to happen in the next decade, and that we're all going to die. And I don't really think it's the mainstream view amongst the climate scientists that we're all going to die in 10 years.
So, well, I mean, I agree with you on that. In fact, when I brought up the Clathrate gun hypothesis and the Arctic Methane Emergency Group, I brought up the fact that they were talking about Ken Caldera on their website, and Ken immediately ran to the forum and said, I disavow John Neeson, and I have nothing to do with the Arctic Methane Emergency Group, and they should remove me immediately from it. So I understand there's infighting there. I understand that there's not full agreement on that topic. And I understand that this originally, the whole CO2 idea came from what was called the calendar effect, back in the early 1930s. But I maintain that, even though Guy Stewart Callender, basically formed this idea behind CO2 and global warming, anthropogenic global warming, that the climate models that they're using, they don't have enough information to make the kind of determinations they're making. That even the geoengineering model intercomparison program, GeoMIP, that they don't have enough information to make the kind of predictions that they're making. That that basically they're playing with fire. They're using insufficient statistics to base all this on, and they're not taking into account so many factors like solar cycles, galactic cosmic rays, aerosols, aerosol cloud interactions, the greatest unknown in climate science.
So why would they do it then? Why would they be having a secret geoengineering program if they don't know if it works or not?
Well, because the CIA has stated, and the Defense Department has stated in at least 20 documents that I've been able to accrue, that climate change is a national, strategic defense problem.
Yeah, but why then would they take the risk of making it worse?
Well, look at the history of the military. I mean, we got the Westford needles. Do I really need to say more?
Well, you probably did, because no one's ever heard of the Westford needles. Okay, this was an experiment, spray needles into space to change the ionosphere.
Yeah, they basically wanted to create a artificial ionosphere. And the interesting point about this is, just before that, in 1958, M. Gorodsky and another Russian individual said we could put metallic particles into space and melt the poles. Carol Livingston Riker in 1921 said we could reroute the Gulf Stream to make it flow into the Arctic and melt the poles.
No one actually tried that, though.
Yeah,
the needles thing was
years.
For radio communications. Basically, they were trying to make a reflective thing. Was that?
Yes,
what the
that was the idea behind the Westford needles.
They weren't trying to affect the weather.
It's coincidental that for at least 50 years up to that point, in major publications, atomized the Arctic. There are many, many different people. UNESCO. That was what Huxley said that. Let's atomize the Arctic. For 50 years, the entire rave was the discussion of melting the poles.
I don't think anybody thinks that's a good idea now, though. I mean, you've talked to all these scientists? Well, some of them, but
actually, and I can
melting the
Arctic,
the Antarctic.
Yes, it's still a very real thing.
But wouldn't that raise the sea levels rather a lot?
They don't care.
I think they care. I think they care.
Well, I think it's more of a tug of war. You have the oil industry on the one hand, which is damned and determined to get to the resources under that ice. If you Google the new Cold War, you can Google this right now.
ExxonMobil wants to melt Antarctica so they can get more oil, and at the same time they're going to destroy New York.
Well, I mean, if you look at disaster capitalism, that's the way things always work. Do you think that the fracking industry cares about, putting poison into aquifers?
I think the scientists care about New York and Florida, and it's where I live, Sacramento. That would be underwater too.
I would agree with you and that's why I say it's a tug of war. I mean, on the one hand,
it's pretty extreme what you're suggesting here. This is you're suggesting a rather.
I don't think it's extreme at all. In fact, when you look at what's going on, I mean, we just take the airline industry for example. On the one hand, I've got 35 documents talking about adding sulfur content to airline jet fuel to cool the planet. Biofuels for contrail control. They're doing the access flights 1 and 2, the ND Max flights now with Germany's DLR, NASA, and the rest. And they're talking about, taking accidental geoengineering from aircraft and turning it into cooling clouds. Ulrich Schumann at the ICAO colloquium on contrail mitigation, he said, we want less warming, more cooling contrails, predictable for operational control.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. But. So then to you it does. And when I spoke to Dr. Rangasai Halthori from the Aviation Climate Change Research Initiative at the FAA, I interviewed him. You remember. He said we want more contrail-induced cirrus clouds by day and none by night. And to just put a coating on the whole thing, then there was the idea of cocktail geoengineering put out by Ken Caldera and company. And what they said was, if we could do cirrus cloud thinning in the Arctic and still create clouds by day and do them in certain targeted locations, then we could cool the planet by cocktail geoengineering. So what was accidental geoengineering is now becoming an active experiment with just the contrails. And this is a fact.
Well, you say it's an active experiment, which kind of implies that they're actually doing something rather than just simply studying the effects of contrails. No one, I don't think, is actually trying to shift contrails more towards nighttime. I mean, the idea here is that at night, away from nighttime. At nighttime, clouds act as an insulating blanket and keep warmth in, and in the daytime, they reflect the sun's rays and they essentially make things cooler. So the idea is you would have more contrails at night, in the day, and that would cool the planet. But you're saying that's an active experiment, but no one's actually doing anything with that other than studying the effects of things to see what happens.
Well, I mean, let's just look at the way things are going and what the stated purposes of these experiments are. I mean, the article originally was 2013, biofuels for contrail control. They've done Access 1 and 2, aviation cruise effects of alternative aviation fuel. I mean, the idea is that they are, when I've got 20 papers that say, let's add sulfur to add sulfur to the jet fuel to cool the planet. And then in the Access flights, they tested a biofuel, a 50-50 mix of biofuel, which is called a drop-in fuel. So it's biofuel and JP8. And then they tested JP8 doped with sulfur. And I asked Dr. Rangasai Halthori, I said, why were you guys testing the JP8 doped with sulfur? He would not give me a straight answer. And the answer is very simple, that they know that sulfur has a cooling effect, and that if they could increase the fuel sulfur content of jet fuel, that it would cool the planet. That's their theory, which is no different than David Key's theory or Ken Caldera's theory about, stratospheric sulfur injections. That if they could put enough sulfur up there, they would cool the planet. So is it an active experiment? No. It is actively being experimented on. That's
being studied.
It's being studied at the ND Max eClif 2 right now. This is the third series of biofuel tests. There are already many major airlines flying biofuels. And the flip side of this is there are other proponents out there saying that it's going to cause more climate change because now you're growing gasoline. And monoculture crops lead to soil erosion. And so it's like the only solution they have to this contrail conundrum, which was highlighted by Jasper Kirkby at CERN, in his cloud project, that basically their only solution is biofuels right now. I went and I spoke at the EPA hearing on flight pollution. And, of course, I told everybody in the public, this is about chemtrails, because I said this to Dr. Rangasai Halthori. I said this, and I want to ask you what you think about this thought. If one were to, if one were to point at, like, say, I point at a cloud and I say chemtrail, and then you point at the same cloud and you say contrail, that we're both right. That at the end of the day, these are just words being used to describe what we see, and perception is reality.
I wouldn't say they're just words, though. People have a very different reaction if you say that's a chemtrail versus that's a contrail. Because the connotation of a chemtrail is some kind of either toxic spraying or some kind of deliberate spraying, whereas a contrail is just an ordinary contrail. So I think there is a very big difference in the way you label things. And, if you're going to call something a chemtrail, I think you really need to have more than just saying, oh, that's just what I'm calling contrails now because they have this effect.
Well, I mean, at the same time, I have a completely different definition of chemtrail than you. So, I was speaking with...
You can't just use your own definition of words.
You've got to use the definition other people use. I'm going to prove I'm right by this way. Chris Fallon was the director of HARP.
Okay? I was just talking to him earlier today.
Yeah, I talk to him on the phone regularly. And I'm going to be doing an interview with him soon. I was debating with Fox meteorologist Paul Delgado about this topic. And what I said to him was, look, chemtrails can mean many different things. Sounding rockets are chemtrails. And he said, oh, that's just BS. And of course, Chris Fallon tweeted, actually, Jim is right. We release trimethyl aluminum, we release lithium, we release barium, we release strontium. In the past, we've released cesium-137.
But these are semantic arguments.
In other words, actual chemtrail, legitimate chemtrail science.
Yeah, but don't you think that it's you're confusing people? Why don't you just say what these things actually are, like sounding rockets? Or rockets that go basically up into space.
I say that in my videos.
And then you say, rockets. Yeah, you say that these are actually chemtrails. But that's just doing a very loose definition of a term, like saying a trail that comes out of the back of something that contains chemicals or is being sprayed out of the back is a chemtrail. So why don't you call crop dusting?
What is a contrail? What is a contrail? It's a condensation trail.
Right, but why don't you call crop dusting?
It's a chemical trail. That's my point about all of this, is that people are so focused on semantics.
Your reaction is...
I am very much focused on semantics because I've read the anatomy of slave speak and I understand how you can control people through words. And that's what a lot of this debate is about, the control of individuals through the use of words.
But you're just making your own definitions up for things.
I'm not actually making my definition up. The basis of the word chemtrail is chemical trail. The basis of the word contrail is condensation trail.
It's a literal...
So how many different chemtrails do you know of? Well, sounding rockets happens to be one. Biological weapons happens to be one. Oil dispersion sprays happens to be one. Agent Orange is a chemtrail.
Car exhaust.
Car exhaust is a chemtrail.
Breathing is a chemtrail because of the carbon dioxide and other chemicals that come out of your mouth when you breathe.
But at the same time,
it becomes meaningless. It becomes meaningless if you're just saying something that's coming out of something that contains chemicals is a chemtrail. It doesn't mean anything. You're confusing people. You're confusing everybody with these things.
But that's the thing. I start off with chemtrails from space. And then I say, what is this chemtrail from space I'm talking about? They are called Black Grant sounding rockets. They are used to study upper atmospheric winds. They are used as tracers to see the Van Allen belts and the magnetic field lines, which are invisible. These metals stick to them. That's the same thing they do when you get a CAT scan or an MRI. So where I'm not trying to confuse people, what I'm actually doing is saying, look, you've heard the word chemtrail. I don't think you really understand what all of these different things mean. I'm going to explain it to you and give you the references. So you tell me any other conspiracy guy, because I'm not a conspiracy guy. I focus on facts, that will go and say, look, I may have called it chemtrails from space, but I'm going to talk to you about the combined radiation release experimental satellite and the Arecibo ionospheric heater that heated those chemicals. I'm going to give you the experiments. I'm going to show you the payloads. I'm going to tell you why they did it, how they did it, when they did it, map it, put it in a timeline. I'm trying to educate people on the facts behind weather modification, geoengineering, and space weather modification.
The problem, though, is that you start out calling things chemtrails, and then you say, look, here's evidence of chemtrails, and like NASA's doing these sounding rockets. And most people are not going to go beyond that. They're going to hear you say, like, here's chemtrails, here's evidence of chemtrails. And you see it all the time, I'm sure. You've seen people post pictures of the sounding rockets. There were those recent ones that were done where they did 5 at once, gave this really pretty displays. They say, look, these are chemtrails, and they don't go beyond that. So by calling them chemtrails, you're actually really distracting from what they really are. You should start out just saying these are sounding rockets. If you say that they are chemtrails, that's essentially giving validity to the whole ridiculous chemtrail theory that there's all this deliberate spraying going on constantly. And
I would love to disagree, to agree with you, but I mean, you can go to climateviewer.com right now, and on the front page it says Project Azure sounding rocket chemtrails from space. I mean, I'm straight up saying the name of the project. They are sounding rockets. Then I say chemtrails from space. But even in my little subtitle, I say barium, strontium, and trimethyl aluminum chemical releases from NASA-funded Auroral Zone Upwelling Rocket Experiment Azure. And then I give you links to the website from the the Grand Challenge, the initiative they have going on, where they're going to try to launch all these rockets over the next couple of years. What they're studying, the ground-based radars that are being shot into these. I'm trying to fill people with facts. So
that's great. No, that's great. But I really feel that using the word chemtrails. I mean, do you do it deliberately to kind of draw people in? Like, they go, "Oh, chemtrails," yes. And then you tell them.
Yes, I do.
The truth.
I've very clearly said for years. Originally all I talked about was jet exhaust, and what I would do is say, "Hey, man, you want to know about chemtrails? Everybody talks about aluminum and barium. Well, let's get to the bottom of this. Is there aluminum and barium in chemtrails?" And, I've got one of my most popular articles on climateviewer.com is aluminum, barium, and chemtrails explain just the facts. And I mean, I point to the IPCC report, 3.2.3.2 metal particles, and they say metal particles comprising elements such as aluminum, titanium, chromium, iron, nickel, and barium.
But a lot of people take that. You say you found aluminum and barium in contrails or jet exhaust, and they say, "Oh, look, proof of chemtrails." And they say, "Oh, this is proof of a covert geoengineering program." So you're giving them this information. But I think by kind of leading with the idea that it's chemtrails, is that all they're going to do is they're going to take the bits that they like in your title, like Project Azure, sounding rockets, chemtrails from space. People are going to take that as being actually chemtrails from space. Most people don't read the articles. Most people who look at things.
I'm fully aware that most people don't read the articles. I look at my statistics. I realize that people watch, if I do an hour-long video, they watch 15 minutes of it. Yeah, if I write an article, you look at the time on page, it's 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Nobody could have read that article in that amount of time. So I understand the problem of attention deficit disorder. I understand that it's TLDR. Most people are like that. But I don't cater to that audience. You have to understand that. The most emails I get from are other climate scientists. I mean, that's the bulk of my audience. Or of course on YouTube it's different. YouTube, you have every single different kind of person. It's a schoolyard basically. You never know who's going to show up or how they're going to interpret what you're saying. But I don't really cater to those people because obviously, if I filled my stuff full of fear porn, I'd have 300, 500,000 subscribers. I'm not trying to make a living doing this. Mm-hmm. I'm doing this because I'm interested in the topic. Yeah. I want to know the facts behind it, and I think that there are a small majority of people who are interested in the science behind this. So,
well, I appreciate that, and I think it's great that you're trying to educate people. But you've got quite a following in the chemtrail community. Like people saw you. You went to the EPA. They had an open hearing where people could speak about I think it was like the carbon dioxide regulations, and you were there, and Patrick Roddy was there. And Patrick Roddy is kind of like a hardcore chemtrail guy who thinks that everything he sees in the sky is evidence of geoengineering, and you are
agreed.
Not. But they lump you together.
So here's the thing. Here's the thing with that. What happened was an individual who is a hacker friend of mine said, "Hey, look, I found this text file on an EPA FTP server." So it's a file transfer protocol server that was announcing, "Hey, we're going to do a public, we have public input on this, and if necessary, we will have a hearing." So I submitted in writing that I would like to be a part of a hearing. Senior policy analyst from the EPA, Lucy Audette, called me and tried to talk me out of coming. This video is on my YouTube. You can listen to her beg me not to come. And I said, no, I think we should do this anyway. And we ended up, because I was the only person who actually said so, they then had to post it on the EPA website. So then I see, the itinerary of all the airline industry, represented pilots association is going to be there, Sierra Club, all these people are going to be there. I said, well, it'd be a shame for me to be the only person to go, that is the dissenter. So why don't I take some people that have different opinions than me and invite them to come as well? So, of course, Madison Star Moon, Amanda Bays, I invited her because to me, even though, and I've told this to her on the phone, that I think she's crazy. And she, she knows how I feel about her, and I know how she feels about me. But regardless, I told her, I said, even though I don't agree with you on everything, what you have done is you've been one of the most vocal, people I know, calling government institutions. I mean, that's what you do all day long. And the thing that they never give you is a straight answer. So I'd like you to come. And Max Bliss, he got word of what was going on, and he called me, and he's like, how do I get in on this thing? And Max is from France. So I explained to him the process. I said, you need to send your email here if you want to be a speaker, and I don't know that they'll let a foreigner in, but give it a shot. And interestingly enough, Patrick Roddy was sitting in the room with Max Bliss at the time. I don't know how that. I mean, that guy. I don't know how he gets to fly around the globe like he does. But regardless, he was sitting next to Max Bliss, and he's like, "Hey, Jim, never met you before. What if I come too?" And I'm like, "Okay." I mean, I didn't know anything about Patrick Roddy at the time, to be quite honest with you. I didn't know who he was. And Michael Saraceno was a follower of mine on Twitter. He actually gave one of the most sobering discussions there, where he talked about the rates of autism around airports, and the link to breathing in metal aerosols and black carbon. And he cited more scientific papers than anybody else, and in fact than everybody else combined. I published his paper on climateviewer.com for everybody to read because I thought it was that good. So at the end of the day, it's the same idea that I said to Dr. Rangasai Halthori. You may not know this, but Amanda had me on her radio show. We actually called Dr. Rangasai Halthori 3 separate times, and we had 3 separate discussions. And what I said to him was, why, when Amanda calls you, when she calls the FAA and she says, I see all these chemtrails over my house, they're blocking out the sun, I don't like it. Why does the FAA come back and say, chemtrails are not a thing? Those are condensation trails, and they are perfectly normal. Instead of saying, we here at the FAA take chemtrails seriously. In fact, we understand that the climate implications of these cirrus clouds that are being created by planes is so grave that we are trying to use biofuels and innovate next generation transportation systems to avoid the climate effects of aviation and the pollution that's created by it. That would be a much more honest answer.
Well, I think you just put the word chemtrails in their mouth there. Like, they wouldn't, for a start, use the word chemtrails because they would say chemtrails aren't a thing, because really chemtrails aren't a thing in the common understanding of the term, which is this large scale spraying program. You have a different definition of chemtrails. So I don't think
the difference is he actually agreed with me. He says, actually, I think we could do a better job on that.
Yeah, but he didn't agree with you that chemtrails are a thing, except in your semantic version of it. The problem is if the EPA or the FAA says that chemtrails are, if they use the word chemtrails, then all of a sudden everybody's going to say, oh, that's an admission that they've been spraying us for years, when obviously that's not true. Except, as again, in a semantic way, in that there's pollution from planes that has effects.
I mean, let's be realistic about this. Both you and I know that contrails have persisted and created cirrus clouds since the early 50s, right?
Since the 20s, actually.
Yeah, I mean, as far back as we've been flying, even when propeller planes, yes, they've been creating clouds. My favorite article was 1958. Jet trails, dim sun, Palm Springs gripes, followed up by the next year, Air Force tells City of Palm Springs, live with the trails or move the city. So, I mean, and then in 1972, the state of Illinois and New Jersey sued the airline industry over making clouds. I mean,
right, but these are contrails. They are, as the FAA would say, just ordinary contrails, and basically live with it like everybody else is doing. Most people, they see these they see contrails all the time, and they couldn't care one way or the other because they grew up with them. They're used to the fact that we have contrails in the sky. But if people become convinced that they are chemtrails, then it takes on a whole different meaning. So I really wouldn't expect the FAA to start using the term chemtrails.
Well, I don't expect them to use the word chemtrails, but the true sign of intelligence is to speak to a person on their level and be understood. And like I said to him, if I go outside and I point at the sky and I point at a cloud and I say chemtrail, and a scientist goes out of the sky and points at the exact same cloud and says contrail, both people are right. Because at the end of the day, I respectfully, I understand that. You will disagree with that, and I'm okay with that. But the problem is that it's just a word being used to describe a cloud. Whether the individual doesn't understand that this is not a chemical poison that is sprayed to eradicate the planet, or it's an intentional geoengineering program, that when they call it a chemtrail, that's slang, and it can be an overarching term. It is used by many different people. It is, infected many parts of our society. So when they deal with somebody who may not be as smart as you and I, that they should be more receptive to their public input when they call the FAA and say, I'm concerned about this, and say, look, I understand that you believe these are chemtrails, even though we think we know that they are contrails. I understand your concern with them blocking out the sun. And I mean, you've got a BBC article, telescopes will be useless by 2050 because of air traffic. That's a real world concern. Solar energy.
Yeah, there are real concerns regarding contrails, but like I say, I don't think that calling them chemtrails is the answer. But I think we could probably go back and forth on this. It's kind of an old argument that we've had over the years. I want to talk to you.
We have had this argument for a very long time. I would agree.
Yeah, I want to talk to you real briefly about. We don't have much time left. About you mentioned fear porn earlier, and you have an article on your site about Nibiru. And I guess this is something that you obviously don't believe that the Nibiru is the idea that there's this planet in the solar system which is doing something, coming towards Earth or orbiting the sun, and people make all these prophecies about it and stuff. And you've written about this, I guess, essentially from a debunking perspective.
It is actually. So this is why. And I thank you in part for my position on chemtrails. To be quite honest with you, early on, I would say I was more inclined to believe a little bit of everything. Like I was less critical of what I was reading, and the comet Elenin phenomena that happened, it was 2012. It was C2010X, the comet that was supposed to end the planet. And,
right.
Of course, I was going through personal issues at the time. I was being trolled by a group of YouTube channels that had hundreds of thousands of subscribers. They were making hundreds of videos about me. So I was in a really paranoid place to begin with. And then this comes along, and I believed it hook, line, and sinker. They say that every good conspiracy is a grain of truth. Mm-hmm. So they mix a little bit of science in there, and then there was this doctor Mensur Omer Bashish. Are you familiar with him?
No.
Crown Prince of Croatia, he claims to be. Anyway, he has this website called seismo.info. And he wrote this paper about the increase in magnitude 6+ earthquakes whenever there were galactic alignments between Elenin, Earth, and the Sun, or Venus, Elenin, Earth. Basically, what he was doing was remixing the music of the Spheres or Musica Universalis, from the olden days. The idea that there's resonant, vibrations between celestial bodies that could react in earthquakes. He was mixing this and conflating it with Elenin. So he had written up all of these, charts on how an earthquake happened when, Mars, the comet Elenin, and Earth lined up.
Wow.
So, I was like, I believed it. And then when it didn't happen, it hit me in the face, and I'm going, how the hell could I be that stupid? And that's when I read the article, The Anatomy of Slave Speak. And the idea is simple. It's language that maintains a master-slave relationship, that people can use words to manipulate you. And when and there's a copy of the article on climateviewer.com. It's linked on the sidebar of every single page on the website. And the quote that I use to link to it is, one of the saddest lessons of history is this: if we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back. And Carl Sagan said that. And I linked that to the article, The Anatomy of Slave Speak. And the idea behind slave speak is real simple. Language creates spooks that get into our head and hypnotize us. That was Robert Anton Wilson. Ideas are more powerful than guns. We would not let our enemies have guns. Why should we let them have ideas? Joseph Stalin. It is hard to fight an enemy who has outposts in your head. Sally Kempton. And the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Stephen Biko. So this is where I come from, this perspective of, high-level descriptor, low-level descriptor, chemtrail, contrail, same. It's a semantic, ninjutsu. It's verbal, kung fu. That people are so busy arguing over the words that they miss the point. It's like, keep focusing on the finger and you will miss all that heavenly beauty. Bruce Lee. That people miss the whole point of the chemtrail debate. That people are upset because they see clouds over their house and they're blocking out the sun. And then some people go a step further and they put all of these attributes on it and they say, well, they must be doing this. And it's definitely geoengineering. Even the guy who said it was geoengineering, he wasn't even talking about the clouds. He was talking about the ice haze. I say that in my videos all the time. You see blue overhead, you see white on the horizon. Those are aerosols. That's what the guy's talking about. The buildup of aerosols whitening the sky. That's what geoengineering would look like, not clouds. But more and more we're hearing about Earth radiation management and cirrus cloud thinning and the focus of geoengineering using cirrus clouds, which are created by planes. So is it, I have intentionally used the word chemtrail to draw people in, to get them to understand that this is a serious problem, that there are people actively experimenting on this, that there are plans to make clouds by day, none by night, stated by the ICAO, stated by the FAA. After our hearing at the EPA, during the Trump-Hillary election, basically, if you don't mind, give me 1 second. I'm going to pull this up so I don't,
Sure.
get this wrong. But this is the timeline of what happened. It's right here. So we had the hearing in 2015, August 11th. July 25th, 2016, breaking EPA to limit greenhouse gases from airplanes. So they had decided they were going to limit greenhouse gases. July 25th, 2016, or July 31st, 2016, less than 6 days later, White House releases Federal Alternative Jet Fuel Research Development Strategy. September 3rd, 2016, China, U.S., and Europe pledged support for Global Aviation Emissions Pact. September 12th, 2016, Greens moved to dismiss EPA lawsuit over airplane emissions. So China, Europe, and the ICAO in the U.S. agreed to use biofuels to fix the contrail problem. And then October 2017, NGOs slam UN Aviation Agency plan for biofuels. So it's kind of ironic. We went there with the purpose of talking about clouds and how people are upset about metal particulates coming out of planes, their possible effects on human health. There are many psychological papers on spending habits of people, mental health conditions of people, just on rainy or cloudy days versus sunny days. So my point being that this is a much more complex topic than people are talking about. People, when you simplify it down to, it's a depopulation program or it's a geoengineering program, every single plane's in on it. That's just pure stupidity. There's never one single cause for anything. Everything is more nuanced than that. So what I saw happen with the EPA hearing was that the whole world agreed we're going to use biofuels to fix this problem with the clouds. And by the way, we're not going to regulate the airline industry at all. Same thing happened in 1972 when they were sued over making clouds. So once again, the airline industry skirted any kind of real regulation. All of the bodies themselves, the ICAO, wrote its own regulations and agreed, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to use biofuels for contrail control. And now
you keep saying that they all agreed to use biofuels for contrail control. I mean, where are you getting this from? I mean, they haven't all agreed that this is what they're doing and that is why they are doing it.
I mean, it's right there in the article. China, U.S., and Europe pledged support for Global Aviation Emissions Pact, which was part of the federal...
they're supporting a pact to reduce emissions. It's not that they're going to use contrail control by biofuels. The emissions they're referring to there is carbon dioxide.
But I would respectfully disagree that when I talk to the head of the Federal Aviation Climate Change Research Initiative, and he says we want to make more clouds.
Yeah.
And that's intent, dude. That's not, hey, this is an accident. Hey, this is just a natural, occurrence that happens as a result of aircraft.
But you can't say the entire world has suddenly agreed to use biofuels. That's not what they're talking about there.
No, but the leaders of the organizations that are in control of aviation have agreed that contrail mitigation through the use of biofuels and or sulfur fuel doping is the way to go. That is their plan. That is what the current plan is. So
I'd have to disagree with you there, but maybe we can look at this stuff offline and.
All right. Well, then I'll send you, when we get off this, I'll send you an interview I did with Dr. Daniel Rosenfeld from the Hebrew University at Jerusalem, and he fully agreed with what I was saying. Right. And he is one of the top cloud seeding scientists on the planet. That basically, what may be considered just mitigation, is active geoengineering. The idea that we would create clouds by day, none by night, that is a stated goal. Just by stating that goal, it goes from being accidental to intent.
Let's just look at that real quick. Like creating clouds by day and none by night. You can't do that just by modifying the fuel.
Of course, you'd also have to modify flight patterns. And,
in fact, most of what you would have to do is modify the flight patterns. In fact, almost entirely, the entirety of that scheme is modifying flight patterns so that you route the planes either around or through ice supersaturated regions. The modification to the fuel really doesn't do that much.
Well, I would argue with that by stating that I have about 10 separate patents from Rolls-Royce to Airbus, where they state that they could use two fuels in one tank, in one aircraft, one part biofuel, one part old style JP8 or Jet A, and that a mixture of the two using the engine's electronic control unit, that they could regulate the production of clouds also. That in a recently released paper, Zapardia et al. 2015. They said we would use ultra low sulfur jet fuel on takeoff and fuel doped with sulfur at altitude, which would reduce mortality around airports, and that would cool the planet by injecting sulfur at altitude.
I think reducing mortality is probably the prime driver there. Reducing pollution
of
around
course.
airports is a much bigger problem in most people's minds than the actual difference you could make by changing the fuel at altitude. But
what I would say is that if you look at this in totality, I mean, and that's what I try to do. I try to look at the macro of things. What's the overarching theme here? And the overarching theme seems to me that there is much more to do about this cloud problem than just simply dismissing it as it's natural condensation. Nothing to see here, which is the natural response you're going to get if you call the FAA or the Eurocontrol or any of these ICAO. That's what they're going to tell you. Nothing to see here, completely natural, but at the same time, with the projected increase in flights, with the amount of fuel you burned each year, with the effects that switching to algae-based, chicken fat-based,
it's more complicated.
It's a very nuanced, problem, and that's I try to focus on all of it simultaneously.
No, well, that aspect I think I agree with. Well, we've kind of gone over an hour here. What are you going to be doing in the future with this type of thing?
I mean, honestly, I kind of feel like I've more than set out to do what I intended to do. I mean, I created weathermodificationhistory.com to document it all in a timeline format. I've been cited by Harvard, MIT, the United Nations Environmental Program, export.gov. This is just a hobby that I do for fun because I'm interested in the topic and I want more people to know about weather modification, space weather modification, ionospheric heaters, all of these technologies, because I don't think the lay person, the general public, know that it's even a thing. While we listen to the news and we hear that every single severe weather event is based on climate change, and they never mention the climate changers, the people who are intentionally changing the weather. I think that that's absolutely freaking ridiculous. Again, I would restate that all of the people talking about climate change know that their models are flawed. And I'll leave you with this. Lawrence Livermore National Lab, Teller, Wood, and Hyde. You know who I'm talking about. Edward Teller, Lowell Wood, and Roderick Hyde published a paper in 1994 about the Pinatubo effect from Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And they said, this is how we long-term stabilization of the climate through spraying crap in the sky. And then the next 1997, their second paper came out. That's when Ken Caldera comes into the mix. And Ken Caldera was working at Lawrence Livermore, and he made a computer model. And he plugged in all the numbers, and he said, this geoengineering idea, it would be great. It would actually, increase, plants would grow better and everything would be just hunky-dory. And then they wrote their third paper and everything was fine. Well, then I come to find out that Bill Gates, Ken Caldera, John Latham, Stephen Salter are all on the same patent for steering hurricanes. And then I find out that Ken Caldera, Bill Gates, Nathan Myhrvold, the patent troll, are all on a patent for cloud ionizers they can rent to farmers to put out in their field to make the clouds either go away, make them rain, all this stuff. So you've got these guys who are claiming they want to save the planet for good reasons because of global warming, but they're also out there making patents for weather modification and steering hurricanes. And the Department of Homeland Security had the Hurricane Modification Workshop in 2008. Who shows up? John Latham, geoengineer.
So you think it's a big plot, not a big conspiracy, but you think there's ulterior motives?
I think that it's a monetary issue. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I mean, when David Keith owns Carbon Engineering, and he knows that he's got money to be made if CDR, direct carbon capture ever gets government funding, he's going to be filthy rich. When Ken Caldera has all these patents, and of course in private emails, Ken's told me multiple times, I would donate all my money if these patents were ever used. I'm not in this for the money. I see ulterior motives to all of these individuals, and at the end of the day, it usually goes back to money. With Chris Fallon from HARP, I see a nerd who's interested in electric science and radio science. I mean, he's a cool cat. I like talking to him. I'm looking forward to interviewing him. But at the same time, we're finding out more and more every day about the connections between the electrical environment surrounding our planet, the ionosphere, the mesosphere, and terrestrial weather. I mean, this is not known science, and every day we learn more about it. So, well,
maybe we should have another discussion about that topic, HARP and whatnot. Because that's another big, area with lots of misunderstandings.
I'll just summarily state that while I believe everybody blames HARP for controlling the weather and steering the jet stream, that is complete BS. I've said so to Chris. I know this to be true, but at the same time, I'm got two companies, Climate Control Global Trading LLC out of Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. Mm-hmm. They claim to steer atmospheric rivers. Dr. David Miles from Miles Research, formerly of Acquiesce, I interviewed him. Says he steers atmospheric rivers. WeatherGenerator.net. They're another company out of the United Arab Emirates, using cloud ionizers to steer atmospheric rivers. So what I see is everybody blaming HARP, and then you've got these companies literally online with websites saying, we do that, and you can pay us to do that. So
but they probably can't, I don't think. They seem to be modern day rain dance type people with their conjuring up rain.
James Roger Fleming would agree with you when he talks about the 3 cycles of the pathological weather modifiers, hope, hype, and all of that. That in the age of pluviculture, which was from 1800s to 1946, there were rainmakers. They made promises, they never delivered. 1946 to present, we've had cloud seeding. They make promises. They can't prove anything that they're doing is actually having an effect. And now we've got the third phase, geoengineering. They're making promises. They don't know what the outcomes will be. And they're basically writing a check their ass can't cash.
Oh, I don't think they're making promises, the geoengineering people, because they haven't actually promised that they're actually going to do things. They say that there's potential of the technology, but they're not saying they can do this and that it will work.
Well, I would say that if you look a little deeper into it and you look at things like John Podesta and Hillary Clinton's super PAC that were meeting right before COP21, the Paris Accord, they were specifically saying, hey, we're actually gonna try to get funding for geoengineering. We think it's a great idea, but for God's sakes, don't mention geoengineering until COP21 is done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
and the day it was over with, academics call for geoengineering in wake of Paris Accord's deadly flaws.
Yeah. Well, so there's a lot of things that we could talk about, and I wish we had a bit more time, but I do have to stop this now. So thank you very much, Jim. Very interesting conversation.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, Mick. It's been a long, interesting ride discussing things with you, and I look forward to doing this again sometime. You're pleasantly known as the Darth Vader of chemtrails.
I'm not sure how that's
for a reason. Yeah, well, I mean, you serve a purpose, and I mean, honestly, you've educated me on certain things. I like to look at your website and then go, I see where he's telling the truth here. I don't agree with him on this fully because I know this. Mm-hmm. But I think that, overall, your heart's in the right place. I agree with you that a lot of people believe way too many crazy ideas about chemtrails. In fact, it is, to be quite honest with you, for me personally, it is my least pleasurable thing to talk about because every time I speak my mind and say exactly what I feel, they come out of the woodworks to throw poo at me. But that's just the nature of the beast, right?
Okay. All right. I'm stopping recording now.